916-339-1140. All right, it is the 8 o'clock hour on Fridays. We like to check in with our Sactown Sports Kings insider, and that means Brenden Nunes joining us here this morning. Brenden, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Jason. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. I mean, I've had some, thoughts about the Sacramento Kings, obviously, and what they've been going through, and some of my preseason evaluations aren't lining up. So my opinion of this team is changing, kind of on a week-to-week basis. I try not to do it game by game, but I'm honestly disappointed in where they are, Brenden. I thought they would be better than they are right now. I don't think it's completely broken, but it's not looking good. And as you kind of do an overall look at this team, what would be some of the bigger contributions for them being 10-13 right now?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing has to be the three-point shooting. It's basic and almost feels like too surface level in a way, but it is a huge part of obviously team success, especially when you're a team like the Kings that, in my mind, their identity should be so much centered around their offensive capabilities. And you go 8 of 35 yesterday against Memphis. It's the sixth time all year that they've not managed to reach 10 triples. They're 1-5 in those games. And, 6 games out of the, 23 that we're into the year is about 1 of every 4 games that you're not able to hit 10 threes. And again, they're not a juggernaut defensively. That's not what DeMar was going to help you with in any sort of aspect. It's maintaining elite offensive efficiency for as close to 48 minutes as you can. And I think that we've seen that more so in these last 3 games. You go back to that first San Antonio game, they put up 120 against them, and then against Houston, and then this 110 against Memphis, I still think was encouraging even without the three-point shooting, doing little things like second chance points, points off turnovers. I mean, the fact that the Grizzlies had, what's the exact number, 22 turnovers in this game. There's encouraging signs, but when it comes down to it, you got to put some wins together in this crowded Western Conference.
Yeah, and that shooting is something that Mike Brown's going to keep referring to, that we've all seen. It's been, pardon the pun, hit and miss, but it's been more miss, obviously, with this team. And is it really more of a roster construction problem, an offensive problem? What would you attribute the biggest flaws in the consistency of nights where they shoot so poorly?
It's a hard one to pin down a little bit because we're talking about guys that are historically really good three-point shooters, and you mainly do have to point to Keegan Murray, who's shooting 27.9%, and Kevin Huerter, who's shooting 27.2%. I mean, these are guys that are capable of being 40% three-point shooters. So they're getting good looks. I think they're, I've had some conversations about maybe they need to simplify their offensive role, not having them come off screens when they're shooting. I don't think they're doing that often, though, from my perspective. I think that we're still seeing a good handful of catch and shoot corner threes or above the break threes from these guys, and they're not going down. I don't really know what choice you have outside of if we were eventually to get into trade conversations, I guess. But you have to rely on these guys to keep shooting. And so much of shooting is confidence. You guys have pointed out the weird stat of how Keegan Murray has been in November throughout his career. Kevin Huerter has had up and down months. And I think that's somewhat the nature of a shooter. But as we're getting closer and closer to 25 games, it's at what point do you have to be this is who these guys are?
Right.
I don't want to say that I'm at that point yet. And I think I'm going to be very stubborn in eventually reaching that, but that's definitely one of the biggest aspects. And as the fan base will point out a lot, maybe the guy that is shooting 44%, Keon Ellis, should play a little bit more.
Yeah, that's something that I was bringing up at the end of the last hour, Brenden, that my own personal confusion with this team, my thought is, I know the bench is underperforming. I think that's just factual, but I don't know that those bench players know their role on a nightly basis, and I think that's a problem. And, for example, last night, Keon Ellis, I know he had a quote-unquote blunder in the game 2 games ago. Then he goes to a DNP. Last night plays 2 minutes. I mean, he was starting a few games ago. They play McLaughlin for 3 minutes. I don't know that those guys know what they're going to do each and every night, to me, and I feel like that inherently is a problem and may reflect on why they're not producing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's definitely an aspect of that. I would say Isaac Jones probably has the most clarity and maybe a little bit of Jake Crowder in there. But you're seeing a lot of variance. And the Keon thing, trying to make sense of it, I would think that, you mentioned the blunders that he had. I want to say that was against the Spurs at the end of some quarters that Mike Brown really emphasized as being a key swing in that game. I will say, like, he's shooting, like I mentioned, that 44% from three and how much better that is than Kevin's 27. But I still think the offense looks a lot smoother with Kevin Huerter out there rather than Keon Ellis, just maintaining that offensive flow, the pace and speed of play that I think they've played with really well over these last three games. But, you do have to be able to find some consistency here. And maybe, I do think part of the issue is the roster construction, obviously, where, maybe Jordan McLaughlin, in my mind, makes sense on a nightly basis as somebody that can maintain pace when De'Aaron Fox hits the bench. But sometimes the reality of when you're matched up against a team and looking over on the other side, you're like, can we really run Jordan McLaughlin and Malik Monk right now just for size reasons? So I think the construction makes it a little tough to have a semblance of consistency there. But to your point, I'm with you that the lack of consistency also probably harms the production from these guys a little bit.
The other area that's honestly surprised me, Brenden, is the fact that last night was another loss in a close game. Ja Morant, gets thrown out with 6 minutes to go. I thought, okay, the Kings might be able to capitalize here, but they lose another close game. They're 3-8 in games decided by 5 points or less. And I thought with Fox as one of the best closers in the league and DeRozan, that would be actually one of the bright spots of the year. Like, look, they're going to be in a lot of close games. It'll be fun to see who takes their turn and which one wins some of these games. That part has honestly surprised me, that this has been their record in these close games. And it really could be switching all of our outlook and outcome on the team if they were, let's say, 8-3. Something as drastic as that. What do you see as their issue here on these close losses?
Yeah, it definitely should be one of their strengths. I will say, even though you have elite clutch players, there is somewhat of an aspect, and not to use this as a cop-out, but I do think, like, you sometimes make or miss a little bit of these. And De'Aaron is still leading the league in total clutch points throughout the year. He's been really stepping up his game in those moments, but I think DeMar's been fine in those moments as well. But it's like you still have to be able to trust the shooters in those aspects. And I think that the trickle-down effect that we've talked about previously of poor three-point shooting is where that starts to show a little bit. I can think of a couple moments earlier in the year where Kevin Huerter had a really good wide-open three to potentially get them back in a game or ice a game in clutch moments, and he wasn't able to knock it down. Or sometimes the right move is to swing to the shooter, but because of the state and nature of how they have been shooting throughout the course of the season, maybe then DeMar or De'Aaron chuck up a tough shot, and it's not like they can't make those, but that's where you're kind of living with a coin flip in a way. So I, do kind of think it goes back to the shooting a little bit, and also some turnovers. I think that they've had a little bit of just enough turnovers that have harmed them in a few of those moments.
Well, do want to advance the thought now. So this is what's been happening. How about what's going forward? Tonight, it's the Spurs, a team that has been tough for the Kings. Victor Wembanyama didn't play last night, but the last 2 times he's played against the Kings, he's been unbelievable. This is a team that hasn't been hitting threes, but of course, against the Kings, they've hit 22 and then a franchise record 23. What do you think about tonight's matchup? What do the Kings have to do better to get back in that win column?
The fact that the Spurs are not very good at threes, and then they tied their franchise record and broke their franchise record, and were not even 25 games into the season, is pretty insane to me. And it makes it hard to sort of not circle three-point shooting, three-point defense specifically. But I think a lot of that stems from the pick and roll. Obviously Wemby, if he's out there tonight, is an issue in sort of mismatches there. And the switching was a key factor that was highlighted a lot after that last game. I'd be curious to see how much they still rely on that. But Chris Paul's a guy that can pick you apart. And if your communication is not just on point defensively, especially when you're doing a switching scheme, then he's going to take advantage of that. And I think that we kind of saw that. So the three-point shooting on both ends, it's really, really tough. We're going to keep saying this, it's hard not to, but when you have as big of a margin of the other team making 5 more threes than you on a nightly basis is what it feels like, that's going to be a little bit tough. But I thought the Kings were able to score pretty much at will against Wemby, even in the paint, like Isaac Jones even going through him, or De'Aaron Fox attacking that aggressively, DeMar DeRozan able to find mismatches on that team. But they've got to do better at pick and roll defense. That was really their Achilles heel in that game. They took care of all the details everywhere else, just could not stop the pick and roll. So you would think that there'd be a little bit more motivation going into this one 0-2 against them on the year, but they did lose 5 or 6 games to the Pelicans last year.
Yeah, 6, unfortunately. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And if you want to see any of Brendan's work, you certainly can go to Sactown Sports. There's a nice recap of the game last night. I saw in your social media post last night, it was a moment I mentioned earlier too, the moment where there was no Fox, Sabonis, DeRozan, or Monk on the floor. That can't happen again. There's no way that should be on the floor. Any one of those 4 should be on the floor at all times, one of them at least.
Yeah, that one didn't make sense to me. It was only 2.5, 3 minutes or so, but maybe only is underselling it because you have all 4 of those guys. And Mike Brown has even said himself that he's always trying to keep one of those guys out there. So that one caught me off guard a little bit. It almost made me wonder if he was punishing, I guess, for lack of a better word, the guys there was some offensive rebounds that they allowed and poor effort. And it made me wonder, maybe he just said, all right, everybody's sitting. I'm tired of this.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Brenden, we'll see what goes on tonight. I know people can check out your work via social media or certainly on Sactown Sports. Thank you. We always look forward to talking to you, and we'll talk to you next Friday.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Thank you. That is Brenden Nunes joining us, sharing good insight. I mean, again, he's sharing some of the oddities that's happening right now with his team. We'll talk more about that, kind of recap some of his